This episode discusses situations documented by homeschool advocacy groups and news reports where misunderstandings about homeschooling triggered investigations. Details have been combined or modified to protect family privacy. Imagine living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tree-lined streets and kids riding bikes after school. School buses stopping at the same corners every morning. Everyone's routine looks roughly the same each day. Children leave the house around 7:30 and they come home somewhere around 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. Except for one house. And that house, well, the child there never gets on the bus. Every morning the bus arrives, every morning the neighbor watches from their kitchen window, and every morning the child stays home. Eventually, that neighbor begins to wonder something. Why isn't that child going to school? At first, they assume maybe the child is sick, but the next day, the same thing happens again, and then again the next day, and again the next, and weeks go by. From the neighbor's perspective, it looks like something is wrong. So one afternoon, the neighbor makes a phone call. And that phone call starts an investigation. Today, we're looking at a situation that has happened to homeschool families across the United States. When someone outside the home simply doesn't realize the child is actually being homeschooled. Inside the house, the family had a completely normal routine. But it looked different from the neighborhood's routine. Their morning started later. Instead of rushing out the door for a bus, their daughter began her day reading. Sometimes they worked through literature together on the couch, and other days math happened at the kitchen table. Science experiments, well, those often took over the backyard. Learning was happening constantly. It just didn't look like a traditional classroom. But from outside of the home, none of that was visible. All that neighbor saw was a child who never left on the school bus to attend school. Eventually, that curiosity from the neighbor turned into concern. The neighbor called the local school district, and they explained that a child on their street never seemed to attend school. The school checked their enrollment records, and according to the district, well, the child had once attended the local elementary school, but the enrollment system didn't clearly show where the student had actually gone afterward. This created confusion. Was the child enrolled somewhere else? Had the family moved away? Or had the student simply stopped attending school? You see, because school attendance is legally required for minors, the district had an obligation to look into it, so they began asking questions. The first step was checking the district database, but the records were incomplete. At some point, the child had been withdrawn from the school, but the system did not clearly show the next step. That kind of record gap can happen for several reasons. Reasons like paperwork delays or data entry mistakes, or even transfers that weren't properly recorded. From the district's perspective, the situation looked unclear. So they referred the matter to a truancy officer for follow-up. A few days later, there was a knock on the family's door, and standing outside was a district attendance officer, and that officer explained that they had received a report that the child might not be attending school. The parents were surprised. They calmly explained that their daughter was homeschooled. They had filed the required paperwork months earlier. The officer asked if they could see the documentation. And this is where the situation changed immediately. Because the parents brought out a folder, and inside that folder were several simple documents. Their notice of intent to homeschool, confirmation emails from the district acknowledging that paperwork, and basic homeschool records. Things like reading logs, math worksheets, and a science project notebook had all been kept and shown to this officer. Within minutes, the situation was clear. The child wasn't missing school. The child was simply learning in a different environment. The attendance officer looked around the room, bookshelves filled with novels and nonfiction and maps pinned to the wall, a stack of library books waiting to be returned, and the daughter eagerly showed the officer a report she had been writing about volcanoes. It became obvious that learning was happening. Later, the district discovered the source of the confusion. The homeschool paperwork had been received, but the withdrawal record in the system hadn't fully linked to the homeschool filing, so the student status looked incomplete in that database. That gap in the records actually made the situation look suspicious to someone who reviewed it later. Once the documentation was confirmed, the district corrected the record and the case was closed. Situations like this happen for a simple reason. Homeschooling is still unfamiliar to many people. Neighbors might not realize homeschool is legal. Officials sometimes rely on databases that were designed primarily for traditional schools. And when those systems encounter something outside the norm, misunderstandings can and sometimes do occur. Most of the time, those misunderstandings can be resolved quickly, but that can still be stressful for families when they happen. There are a few simple steps that can help protect homeschooling families from situations like this. First, keep copies of all your paperwork. Save your notice of intent, save your withdrawal confirmations, and maintain simple learning records. Things like reading lists, project photos, and work samples. You don't need elaborate documentation, just enough to show that learning is actually happening inside your home. This way, if a question ever does arise, those records can resolve the situation quickly. In the end, the investigation lasted less than an hour. The attendance officer closed the report and the district corrected the database. And the family continued homeschooling without future issues. But the experience taught them something important. When you homeschool, your routine may look very different from the world around you. And sometimes that difference raises questions. And when it does, simple documentation can turn a confusing situation into a quick explanation. Because learning doesn't only happen inside of school buildings. Sometimes it happens at the kitchen table, and sometimes it happens in the backyard, and sometimes it happens quietly inside a home where curiosity has room to grow.